Read-along audiobooks, the best of the classics. Sleeping Beauty by Charles Perrault. This is part 2 of the Sleeping Beauty tale. Part 1 of the tale tells the story of how the Sleeping Beauty fell into an enchanted sleep and how the prince woke her up and married her. The Sleeping Beauty, Part 2. Early next morning, the prince returned to the city, where he knew his father would be worried about him. The prince told him that he had lost his way in the forest while hunting, and that he had slept in the hut of a woodcutter who had given him black bread and cheese to eat. The king, his father, who was a simple-minded man, believed him, but his mother was not so easily satisfied. She noticed that he went hunting nearly every day, and when he spent 2 or 3 nights away from home, he always had some story ready as an excuse. So she felt quite sure that he had a lady love. More than 2 years went by, and the princess had 2 children. The first, which was a girl, was named Aurora. The second, a son, was called Day, and he was even more beautiful than his sister. The queen, hoping to find out the truth from her son, often said to him that he should find a wife, but the prince never trusted her with his secret. Although he loved his mother, he feared her, for she was of the race of ogres, and the king had only married her because of her great riches. Some even whispered in court that she had the inclinations of an ogress, that when she saw little children passing, it was with the greatest difficulty that she restrained herself from pouncing upon them. The prince, therefore, would never say one word to her about his affairs. When the king died 2 years later, the prince became his own master. He made a public declaration of his marriage and went in great state to bring the queen, his wife, to the palace. She made a magnificent entry into the capital with her 2 children, one on either side of her. Sometime afterwards, the king went to war with his neighbor, the Emperor Cantalabute. He was likely to spend all summer in the field, so he left the queen mother, his mother, as regent of the kingdom, asking her to care for his wife and children. As soon as he left, the queen mother sent her daughter-in-law and the children to a country house in the woods. There, she planned to satisfy her horrible longing. She followed them to the country house a few days later. One evening, the queen mother said to her head cook, "I will eat little Aurora for dinner tomorrow." "But madame," exclaimed the cook. "I will," said the queen, and her voice was that of an ogress longing to eat fresh meat. "And I will have her served with my favorite sauce." The poor man, seeing plainly that an ogress was not to be trifled with, took his great knife and went up to little Aurora's room. She was about 4 years old, and came jumping and laughing to throw her arms about his neck and ask him for sweetmeats. He burst into tears, and the knife fell from his hands. Then he went down again and into the farmyard, where he got a little lamb. He served the lamb with so delicious a sauce that his mistress assured him she had never eaten anything so excellent. In the meantime, he carried off little Aurora and gave her to his wife, to hide her in the lodging at the further end of the farmyard. A week later, the wicked queen mother said to her head cook, "I will eat little Day for supper." He made no reply, having decided in his own mind to deceive her as before. He went in search of little Day and found him with a tiny foil in his hand, fencing with a great monkey, though he was only 3 years old. He carried the child to his wife, who hid him where she had hidden his sister. Then he cooked a very tender little calf, in the place of little day, which the ogress thought was wonderfully good. All had gone well enough so far, but one evening the wicked queen mother said to the head cook, "I would like to eat the queen with the same sauce that I had with the children." Now the poor cook was indeed in despair, for he did not know how he would be able to deceive her. The young queen was over 20 years of age, without counting the 100 years she had slept, and no longer such tender food. Even though her skin was still white and beautiful, where among all his animals would he find one old enough to take her place? He decided at last that to save his own life, he would kill the young queen. He went up to her room, determined to carry out his purpose without delay. The cook worked himself into a passion and entered the young queen's room, dagger in hand. He did not wish, however, to take her by surprise, so he repeated to her, very respectfully, the order he had received from the queen mother. "Do your duty," she said, stretching out her neck to him. "Obey the orders given to you. I will see my children again, my poor children whom I loved so dearly." For she thought they were dead, ever since they had been carried away from her without a word of explanation. "No, no, madame," replied the poor cook, touched by her sadness. "You will not die. You will see your children again. But it will be in my own house, where I have hidden them. I will deceive the queen mother again by serving a young hind in your stead." He led her right away to his own apartments. Then, leaving her to embrace her children and weep with them, he went and prepared the hind. The queen ate her supper with great appetite, thinking it was the young queen. She exulted in her cruelty and intended to tell the king, on his return, that some ferocious wolves had devoured the queen his wife and her 2 children. One evening she was prowling, as usual, round the courts and poultry yards of the castle to inhale the smell of fresh meat. Suddenly she overheard little Day crying in one of the lower rooms, because his mother was about to whip him for being naughty. She also heard little Aurora begging forgiveness for her brother. The ogress recognized the voices of the queen and her children and was furious at being deceived. She gave orders, in a voice that made everybody tremble, that early next morning a large copper be brought into the middle of the court. She filled the copper with toads, vipers, adders, and serpents, in order to throw into it the young queen and her children, the head cook, his wife, and his maid servant. She further commanded that they should be brought there with their hands tied behind them. There they stood while the executioners were preparing to fling them into the copper, when the king entered the courtyard on horseback. He was not expected back so soon, but he had ridden in haste to get back to his family. In great astonishment, the king asked what the meaning of this horrible spectacle was. No one dared tell him. At that moment, the ogress, enraged at what she saw, flung herself head first into the copper. There she was instantly devoured by the horrid reptiles with which she had filled it. The king could not help being sorry for it. She was his mother. But he quickly consoled himself with his beautiful wife and children. Waiting some time for a husband, who is young, handsome, wealthy, and tender, might not be too great a hardship, for a maid who love would make happy. But to be bound for a century to live single, I believe only a small number of beauties would be found who could for so long patiently slumber. To lovers who hate to waste time and measure minutes as centuries, I would hint Those who marry in haste may live to repent it at leisure. Yet they press onward so ardently and trample so gallantly on prudence that I have at the heart, I confess, to urge them to follow beauty's example. The